So Keegan's with our Planning and Development Department. He's our Land Development Manager, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the innovations that the city is working on.
Great. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Ashley, as well. My name is Keegan McDonald. I'm Land Development Manager, as Erica mentioned. And so I'm going to talk about the implementation of zoning reform here in the city. And I think this has been touched upon by a few of the speakers, but really what we mean by the term zoning reform, which is kind of an umbrella term and depends on which jurisdiction you're speaking about, is really a reevaluation of the fundamental characteristics of how we regulate land use and built form. And so over the past probably decade or so, there's been a growing understanding that the zoning regime that's been in place since about the mid-20th century has prohibited many types of housing throughout large swaths of our cities, including Raleigh up until pretty recently. And so this is really stands in stark contrast to how neighborhoods developed somewhat more organically prior to kind of conventional zoning regulations being put in place. And obviously zoning still has a purpose. Not many people want to live near an industrial area, but due to a variety of factors, different rules and regulations have been put in place that really effectively limit the types and variety of housing that can exist in different parts of a city, and that has limiting effects in terms of where people can move to, what types of housing they can access, and also the amenities and traits of a neighborhood that they can have access to. All right, I think that's the next slide, so I'll go with it. So in terms of the conversation here in Raleigh, obviously it's been taking place for some time, but really at a formal level, took place starting back in about 2017 in a council committee, but it didn't really prompt any specific change to our regulations until about 2019, when we took a look at a housing pattern that we have in our code called cottage courts. And so what that really refers to is small homes clustered around a common courtyard. And I just bring up that specific example because it really kind of starts small, and then there was momentum that was built through public conversation and through different councils that came on board and research that was done on part of staff. And so after 2019, when we made some more modest changes, larger steps were taken, such as the legalizing of accessory dwelling units. Those are separate dwellings that can be located in association with a principal structure. And then two rather large omnibus-style changes to our code that we've referred to as Missing Middle 1.0 and 2.0. And I'll provide a little bit more detail on what those included. And then also what Pat had mentioned during his presentation was the elimination of minimum off-street parking requirements. And while that doesn't directly affect the types of housing that can be built in different areas of the city, it has an indirect effect because it allows for a developer or someone who wants to provide housing to only provide the amount of parking that they think might be necessary. And so in a more urbanized context, it might be less. In a suburban context, more. But it creates some flexibility and also reduces a really major cost to providing housing. And then following the adoption of those code changes, we've also been engaging with the community. More Homes, More Choices was one of the outreach efforts we had in 2023, where we had an opportunity to sit down with residents, hear how they were understanding and experiencing the code changes since they had started to be implemented and units were being either designed or constructed. And that's going to hopefully help inform sort of the next iteration and refinements to the policies that we put in place. We've always understood that these were pretty significant reforms in terms of how things had been structured for a while, and we are certainly committed to kind of further strengthening them over time. And I just want to note that the More Homes, More Choices tagline, if you're more curious about my piece of the presentation, there's a lot of materials online from when we did those community engagement sessions. And so if you search More Homes, More Choices Raleigh, you should be able to pull up those materials if you're curious. Here is the strategy that we kind of embarked on. And so the timeline highlighted the major points, but The code changes that we pursued could kind of be grouped into 11 categories, which are listed here. Some of them are really minor, so changing how wide of a lot or site you need to build a certain type of housing, so whether that be a duplex or apartment or townhouse. We unified those standards to make it possible where those specific housing types are permitted, or permitting flag lots, which allow someone to utilize the rear portion of their lot to locate a home. And then more significant changes, number 11 there, which is abbreviated, where we enabled townhouses and apartments in existing neighborhoods that are in close proximity to planned frequent transit service. And what this really tallied up to, and I think Pat displayed this slide earlier, is a really kind of broad but shallow impact, meaning a lot of the areas of the city were impacted to some degree, but relatively modest impact when it comes to the allowable densities, residential densities, that were enabled through this collection of code changes. And so this is not representative of every single change that was made, but really more of a sampling to kind of show the impacts in various zoning districts. So whether that be the residential 2 zoning district up to the residential 10 zoning district. And those R2 is the less dense areas of the city, R10 the higher density areas of the city. And so you can see opened up a lot of opportunity. And this analysis was really just based on minimum lot size requirements, so it doesn't take into account every single factor that could lead to the construction of a home, but obviously opens up a lot of opportunity that previously wasn't there. And what we've seen this materialize into is an uptick in exactly the types of housing that we were hoping to incentivize, so things beyond just single-family homes. So those include townhouses, duplexes, and also ADUs. So since some of these changes went into effect, we've certainly seen an increase in permit applications that have been filed with the city, and then even more so, as Pat had mentioned, people seeking entitlement, meaning sort of the preliminary approval you need to pursue some of these housing types. So we've seen a lot of units that are somewhere in the pipeline. I think what we're learning since implementing these changes is there's a pretty significant lag time between when you implement policy and when units actually get constructed. But we are very excited that some of the changes have been utilized pretty readily. Particularly the ADU program is one that's been in place probably the longest, and we've seen a lot of interest and also a lot of resources that the city has been able to provide to make that possible for people who have interest. And now that we've started to see some of these units be constructed, the city has actually partnered with the NC State Initiative for Community Growth and Development to conduct a qualitative assessment of the people who are moving into these new housing units. So here are some of the folks that are involved from NC State. I want to just call out Bethany Cutts, Tom Berry, Adam Walters, who are kind of leading that team. And then I have helped to a modest degree in terms of providing them with data and feedback based on their study design. And again, what this is really intended to do is reach out to the people who have moved into those new units through different survey methods and instruments, understanding what brought them into that new housing, what types of things interested them in moving to those neighborhoods, what types of trade-offs were they evaluating, and then also looking at the sentiments of their neighbors. So how is this new housing impacting people who might be in the vicinity, and comparing and contrasting those particular sentiments. And perhaps even kind of more interesting is looking at least with this first phase, the moving chain effect that can happen when people occupy new housing. They often leave somewhere within the city and open up housing opportunities in their previous neighborhood. And how far back can we go in that moving chain and see the benefit that can occur downstream from the new housing? I think as Pat mentioned, without subsidy or some other type of financial assistance, it's really hard for new market rate construction to be affordable or meet some of those lower AMI thresholds or marks. But there is a real benefit to providing housing at all income levels because, again, it opens up opportunities down the moving chain, and that's part of what this study is hoping to uncover. And so right now we are sort of in the middle of this study effort in that March to October kind of time frame. Started issuing surveys to folks and then finding individuals who are interested in doing a more in-depth interview where we can go a little deeper than the initial questionnaire and then also investigate the moving chain, as I mentioned before. I think what we're finding, again, is that the sample size is a little smaller than we had hoped in terms of the number of completed and occupied units, but we still think we're going to be able to gather some great data from this. And then towards the end of the year, hope to finalize a report that we can bring back for evaluation and presentation to the council and the public. And long term, we're hopeful that this can materialize into a next phase of the study where we can understand sort of the housing market impacts once these policy changes have been in place for a while longer. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to our Deputy Director of Planning and Development, who will cover, Ken Bowers, who will cover public-private partnerships and new funding models.
Thanks. So I'm Ken Bowers with Planning and Development, and for the last couple of years I've had a special role within the department of creating and helping to lead a new division or working unit called Urban Projects, and we are trying to create a stronger capacity within the city organization for engaging in public-private partnerships. And I think that has a key tie-in with a lot of what you've heard today, because basically all of our work on the housing side is some form of public-private partnership. So I'll start by saying that we brought a policy forward to City Council earlier this year that was unanimously adopted in May, which I'm very pleased with that. And that gave staff a framework for how we discuss partnership opportunities with the private sector. And it covers the three main categories of partnerships, or when you are teaming up with a private developer to, say, revitalize an area and it needs some public participation to make that happen. The second thing is that maybe you're trying to piggyback on a large development project to produce some public infrastructure at a lower cost or more quickly than you could do it on your own. And the third is when you're trying to use a city asset, typically land, to either create a source of funds that can be used for other things or to create a public benefit. And in the housing space, that's by far the most common thing that we're doing, is we're using a public asset, land, which we either own for a while or that was purposely acquired for the purpose of building affordable housing and then making it available. So here's three big examples. One of them you may not be as familiar with, but the city has acquired around 4 acres from a very old post-war rental community called Duplex Village. It's right off of New Bern Avenue, not far from the Longview Shopping Center. It came up for sale. We went to a buyer and said, we'd like to partner with you to buy a portion of it. So a portion of it's going to be market rate, a portion of it will be affordable. And our 4-acre parcel we probably made available for a very conventional tax credit financed affordable housing project because it's a sufficient size. It's actually right next door to a DHIC, which is a nonprofit developer affordable senior housing project. The middle example, which I'm going to go into in a little bit more detail and give you some hard numbers as to what's going on there, is the Moore Square project. And the Moore Square project is not 100% affordable, it's mixed income. And it's mixed income because it sits on very pricey land, some of the priciest land in the city. And in order to make affordability work there cost effectively, you have to do it differently than you would on lower cost land. And then the third example, which is still in the planning stages and the community engagement stages, and I see Helen Tart here is on a group that is of community members who are helping to lead that process, is to envision the future here. And do we want to use a model similar to the Moore Square model, or do we want to consider a model similar to what Montgomery County is doing? And I'll talk about that because I think there's some amazing opportunities, again, for mixed income development there. So when Free land is great, but most of the time you have to buy it. And when you buy it, you're competing with other people who also want to buy it. And most people who sell land sell it to the person who's going to pay the most for it. So a market rate developer building, say, a standard mid-rise apartment building like you've seen rise all over downtown and near the Village District in NC State, is about 100 units per acre. And people who are in that business tell me that they can afford to pay about $35,000 per buildable unit for land. So at 100 units an acre, $35,000 a unit, that's $3.5 million for land per acre in these areas that support that level of density. A tax credit developer typically builds at a much lower density because they're trying to keep their construction costs low. Most of the tax credit developments around the city are at about 20 units per acre because that's as good as you can do with wood frame construction and surface parking. If they try to put that model on that land, they're at $175,000 a unit just for land before a single brick has been put on the ground, which is, and as Mark noted, none of that is offset by tax credits because it's not part of the qualified basis. My super simple model of how affordable housing is financed is you have the land, which is not part of the basis, and then most of the other stuff, which is, and the 4% credits offset about a third of that. And the permanent debt, as Mark noted, supports about $125,000 per unit. So all the remaining gap has to be filled by some sort of local program. And here, that's mostly the city partnership with the county filling that gap. When you go to the expensive land, the mid-rise sites that you see that are 100 units an acre, all of a sudden the land is half or more of the entire cost of producing that unit. And this is not feasible. Now the local programs are over half the capital stack. It's extremely expensive and not at all cost effective to produce housing this way. So the affordable developer, the only thing they can do is they have to build as densely as the market rate developer is building. But to do that drives up the hard cost of construction significantly, $80,000 to $100,000 more per unit to build in that mid-rise or what they call podium or garage wrap buildings than it is for a conventional building. That's better because you get more tax credit equity into it, and so the local programs have to subsidize less, but it's not as good as it could be. So the Moore Square case study is interesting because, again, 4 to 5 acres is sort of a magic number for a 4% tax credit project. That's how much the city had to sell. The land was appraised around $8 to $10 million an acre, and we had a target in the RFP of 120 affordable units, which again is typical for a tax credit project. And if we only did the affordable units, the land cost would be $300,000 a unit, which is obviously unreasonable. So what do we do instead? We used a mixed income solution. So the affordable component stands alone on its own parcel. It's financed separately from the rest of the development. It uses only 1.2 acres of the total. It's got 160 units in it. So it's a 7-story building, a very unusual. I think there's never been another tax credit development in the city that uses this particular development typology. The cost of it is very high, though, $56 million. So the all-in cost of everything is about $350,000 a unit to do that building, compared to the $250,000 that Mark talked about that's more typical for the lower cost. So another additional $100,000. Tax credit equity comes in at about $19 million or $120 per unit. So there's about a $16 million financing gap that has to be filled by the city. However, because we had the remaining land, almost 3 acres, to sell at the market rate as worth $8 to $10 million, we're going to get $23 million of land sale proceeds from that, which can now be flowed directly into filling that gap with some money left over, assuming everything goes as currently planned. So even though this was a much more expensive construction type, by liberating the value of the land for the market rate components, by making the affordable component as compact as possible, we were able to come out with a much more favorable financial structure for the city than if you tried to do this as a 100% affordable project. Now, if we are able to do something like the Montgomery County model, you get even new flexibility, because one of the things about using tax credits is there is a thing called the Qualified Allocation Plan, or QAP, that's adopted statewide, and it's the same rules for development in the most rural and most urban parts of the state. There is no variation or accounting for the different circumstances. And as a result, they have certain standards, minimum standards of quality for unit size. They want a playground and other open space amenities on the site, which are all very good and good things to have, but they complicate and drive up costs when you're developing on very tight urban sites. There's also a significant amount of overhead that's associated with using tax credits in your capital stack. There are lawyers to pay and accountants and syndicators and others who are all part of the tax credit space. They all do hard work to make the system work, but they all need to get paid. If you can eliminate some of that, you could also lower some of your overhead costs. So this is one of the reasons why we're very interested when people talk about the struggle of trying to produce affordable housing downtown, specifically near jobs. An early question today was, how can we get more housing in employment centers? Well, the employment centers are exactly where the land costs tend to be the highest. So having a different tool in our toolbox is a big part of that. So I won't recapitulate the excellent presentation from Sherry about the Housing Production Fund. I'll just say that when we learned about it, we were incredibly intrigued by it. We realized we would need a partner in the Housing Authority if it were to work here. We don't know yet whether it will work here. We are trying to study that, but we are going to partner to do a study and see if something like this is applicable in Raleigh. If it is, it could provide us a powerful new tool to engage in new types of partnerships that will allow us to produce housing in locations that before now have been not cost effective. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Emila to close us out to talk about our Rapid Response Homeless Program.
Okay, thanks so much, Ken. Appreciate that. So I'm going to finish this out today to talk about how the city of Raleigh is addressing homelessness, specifically unsheltered homelessness, and some of this will kind of marry into and build on what we talked about this morning, and also a little bit about what Nate brought into the conversation. Okay. So as we talked about earlier this morning, and repeating what Nate said, ending homelessness is not a mystery. We know exactly how to do it. We just need the resources. We also know how much it's going to cost. So we know that it would take approximately $24,000 per year to end homelessness for one household. And for Raleigh's current count, we have about 463 people counted living outside. Now, we know that is an undercount. That is the best data we have right now. However, the Continuum of Care recently did an additional count to try and get at what is the actual number of people living outside, so we can really understand the scope. And so to do this, so for the 463 people, if we wanted to address their homelessness today, that would be, if you do like a back of the napkin, it's $11 to $12 million per year, right? So that would end unsheltered homelessness as we know it today. I do want to also say, though, that we can't do this alone. The county is really the leader in the homelessness space, and we're really excited to partner with them to expand our work and to really address this issue together. We already, just this last couple of weeks, were able to house 4 people living outside with the county. It was super exciting, and it was a really great example of how the city and county can work together to bring people directly from the street into housing. So I'm just going to repeat too, we are really at this inflection point, we believe, in the city of Raleigh, where either we build the infrastructure to really end homelessness, or we build these really expensive management tools that don't actually address the root issue. So, and Nate touched on this a little bit, but really right-sizing our system is important, right? So crisis response and what Greg talked about, these are essential pieces of our puzzle, right? We have to have crisis response, we have to have shelter, we have to have people doing this really important immediate health and safety work in our community. However, they cannot do it all, and nor should we expect them to, right? We need to set up a system to get flow so that we are alleviating the crisis system by quickly and rapidly housing people. So that alleviates not only pressure on the crisis system, but it also means we're not over-investing in that expensive piece of the system, but we are investing on permanent solutions to get people permanently housed. And again, a big part of that, as Nate also talked about, was the importance of prevention and diversion. So the city is also investing in homelessness diversion and prevention work in order to add that essential component to make sure that people who are currently housed stay housed. And they don't, like what he described, fall into the homelessness system and kind of get captured there, but that we can keep people stably housed. The goal here is functional zero. What does that mean? That means ending someone's homelessness within 30 days or less. No one spends more than 30 days experiencing homelessness. This is within reach. Communities have done it. We can do it. When we asked Greg the question about what community is a blueprint, I think that's Raleigh, right? Like, I think we really are going to be the blueprint for ending homelessness in this country. We have the partners. We have all of the expertise. It's incredible, a lot of which is in this room. And we have the partnerships. We just really need some targeted resources, and we can bring it home. So the unsheltered response pilot, Council approved a pilot program that would directly house approximately 45 people from a camp into housing. This is designed to show proof of concept. Again, Nate really described well, this can work, and we're going to show that it can work. We are providing direct housing assistance, homeless system support, as well as a coordinated response support, which we'll talk about it a little bit more. And so this will, again, house 45 households and successfully close camps within the city of Raleigh. And while 45 people, as we know, is a great start, we also know that the need is far greater, and we really need to scale up these types of efforts. So as far as a timeline and where we are on the pilot, we have released requests for proposals were issued to identify suitable partners for the three critical roles in the implementation of the program. As you can see here, these are currently under review. We're actually going to announce next week who was scoring the highest on these proposals. So we're really excited to roll out these contracts and to get this work started, because people are dying outside every day. So once we have pilot implementation, hopefully beginning this fall, as soon as we possibly can, we anticipate the first camp will be decommissioned by December or January. It typically takes about 4 to 8 weeks to connect folks with housing in a meaningful way and with those supportive services. And components for housing placement include identifying housing options, benefits counseling, rental application processes, and owner negotiations with owners, as well as move-in assistance. Okay, so along with this, the city is also engaging in unsheltered homelessness response strategy work. So in addition to the pilot, we are engaging in a community-wide process to come up with a strategy to end unsheltered homelessness. We're super excited about this. And this will be, again, a community-wide strategy that addresses this issue and connect individuals without stable housing to permanent homes, also ensuring they receive necessary supportive services. And after securing long-term solutions, like New Orleans, we will work to decommission camps, bringing more suitable and supportive approach to ending homelessness in our community. Here are some of the strategy elements, and I will note here that a big part of how we're moving forward in this work is involving voices of people with lived experiences. In fact, an expertise, which is vital and crucial to this work. We must have input and feedback from people who actually have expertise and experience in this and homelessness in order to be successful in the long term and sustainable. The consultant we're working with, in fact, is a person with lived experience that's leading this effort, and we're really excited about our direction. As far as the timeline for the strategy, we had a request for proposals for the consultant we're working with, who's helping to facilitate this community-wide process. They're identified. We're beginning the conversations now, and then summer and winter, the consultant will go out along with us and consult with partners and community stakeholders to include additional people with lived experience. We're really excited to get this started. We would love all of you in this room to be a part of this process. It really takes all of us collectively together to make this work happen. So this is just noting all of the partners that we really need at the table for this. Ending homelessness is a challenge, and it cannot be tackled by any single organization or entity on its own. It really requires us all to come together in a concerted effort and deep collaboration across our entire continuum of care. And by pooling resources, sharing expertise, and working together, we can effectively and comprehensively address homelessness in our community. And this is just a slide showing, just imagine a Raleigh that has functionally ended homelessness. Our neighbors who are currently living outside would experience health once connected with stable housing. Research shows that permanent housing leads to reductions in both physical and mental health concerns among formerly homeless individuals. The economy would benefit as well. Evidence shows that people who secure stable housing are more likely to gain and retain employment, thereby contributing positively to the economy. And reducing homelessness decreases the demand for emergency and social services, as noted prior, leading to a lot of cost savings, as we've talked about earlier in the day, for local governments and taxpayers, enabling reinvestment in other community services. At a localized scale, this would bolster downtown businesses. When people are housed, they are more likely to spend money on local goods and services, boosting local businesses and revenues. Stabilizing neighborhoods creates more favorable environment for retail and dining establishments, and reducing homelessness can lead to higher property values and more attractive urban areas, which benefits businesses by enhancing the overall appeal of downtown districts. And the local housing market would also benefit. Supporting sufficient housing supply and access not only benefits people experiencing homelessness, but households at all price points. And increasing supply can help end homelessness and also alleviate pressure on rental markets by reducing competition for low-cost housing and stabilizing rental prices for low-income households. The positive impacts of ending homelessness can ripple out for generations. Stable housing is crucial for children's academic success. Studies show that children in stable homes perform better in school, experience fewer behavioral problems, and have improved health outcomes. We know that children are living outside right now today. We shouldn't accept this as reality. And we can do it. I mean, that's really the message, right? We've heard from our speakers today. We know that we can continue to add affordable units, and that will help alleviate pressure and help end homelessness. In addition, we can address the urgent health and safety that is right in front of us together. And with that, we just wanted to thank you all so much for coming today. We want to thank all of our incredible guest speakers, our wonderful MC Grady, and our entire city team who helped organize this event and the content presented today. Huge thank you to everyone, and also to our elected officials and city leadership for their participation and for you all spending your Saturday with us. Really deep appreciation and gratitude for all of you. We know we covered a lot today, but we really appreciate you all being here to learn more and contribute your ideas to solving Raleigh's housing puzzle one piece at a time. The bottom line is that while a lot of factors contributing to affordability are outside of the city's control, we are deeply committed to doing everything we can to address this crisis. We go to sleep and we wake up every day, like you all, thinking about how do we end homelessness? How do we provide more affordable housing to our neighbors and community members? This means using our resources wisely, being proactive, and most importantly, collaborating with all of you all in our community to develop new and creative solutions like those we talked about today to make housing affordable and attainable for all who want to call Raleigh home, and also to end homelessness in our great city. It is within our reach. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your weekend.